So I'm going to correct Brandon on one thing. We're all here because Edmonton is a great place for creators. Edmonton has lots of hurdles for all of us, but it also has a lot of strengths. And that's why I think this is such a great organization. And I think Brandon for introducing those of you who haven't been here to the space. There are a few faces that I recognize from other shows and that sort of thing, so I thank you for coming back. And I'm going to talk about shock. Both.
Nailed it.
Right on point. What I want to do, I'll just explain a little bit about what DC3 Art Projects is. We're a contemporary art gallery. The show that's around you right now is part of a show that we put together of contemporary artists, musicians, composers, as a way of showing different ways of exhibiting sound. Okay, there's a real... Sound art isn't a new thing. It's been around for a very long time, but there's been a growing recognition of sound as an important component of the artistic experience and the creative experience. And so Scott Smallwood, a professor of composition at the University of Alberta, and a bunch of colleagues got some SSHRC money to do a conference about exhibiting sound. It was a two-part conference. They did an ethnomusicology conference at University of Cape Breton in the spring, and they're doing an exhibiting sound conference here. There's symposiums all weekend. There's a website, exhibitingsound.ca, and I'd encourage anybody who has any interest in sound in particular to come to the opening tomorrow evening. There's keynotes tomorrow night at the AGA. There's a performance tonight which is going to knock people's socks off by a duo, Scott Smallwood and Stephen Moore from Rhode Island, who operate as a group called Evidence. They use electronic sounds, they use hacked toys, they use fans and stuff that they buy at the dollar store and that sort of thing in a musical performance. It's free. It's tonight, and I'm sorry, I don't know the time. I think it's 7 o'clock at the Provincial Museum. In addition to that, Gary James Joins, who's a sound artist here in Edmonton, who I've been working with for about 5 years, is also performing. So that's my plug for that. Everything that's in the room here has something to do with sound. So the pieces along the back wall are graphic scores. They're done by a composer here in Edmonton named Harold Bashaw, for a piece he composed for the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. These are the scores, okay? Not standard graph nomenclature. These are the instructions. And I don't pretend to understand it. They're beautiful objects, but that is sound. This is a printed skull of a Albertosaurus or a similar horn-crested dinosaur, which actually is an instrument. So the artist / engineer / creator from Arizona State University, Courtney Brown, has printed it and created a way of making sound through what we think are the sonic chambers in the skull of the thing. The drawing on the wall is Eleanor King, who's originally from Halifax, currently in New York, and she uses older media and creates visual art with older auditory media. Marla Hlady is the artist who's done a number of objects through the space. She is a internationally recognized sound visual artist, and these are in fact pieces that have shown at the National Gallery. That's this show. I'm here to talk about shock. And so I have a couple of ways of referring to shock, and one is from the medical point of view, okay, and that's my first starting point, where shock is an acute medical condition associated with a fall in blood pressure, caused by such events as a loss of blood, severe burns, bacterial infection, blah, 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 and emotional stress marked by cold, pallid skin, irregular breathing, rapid pulse, and dilated pupils. Shock is also defined as a sudden upsetting or surprising event or experience, or a feeling of disturbed surprise resulting from an upsetting event. Okay, so how do those things go together? I'm going to describe an experience I had that really, really shook me to my core. But first, so I'm going to describe an event historically. In 1913, Igor Stravinsky composed commissioned ballet called The Rite of Spring. It was performed, and the way that Paris performed ballets at that point, the rich people bought box seats, and they were up sort of in the upper part of the theater, and in the lower chambers were the commoners, okay, people who didn't have a lot of money. They came in, they wanted to pad the seats, bums in seats, as they say. And this is a piece that was performed in 1913. By reports from the theater and from the streets of Paris, it actually led to riots because it was so upsetting to the common people, and in fact to the box seats, because it was such a departure from orchestral and ballet music of the time. It's gone on to become one of the formative orchestral works of the 20th century. It is performed all over the world and has become a standard within the canon of contemporary music, leading through Schoenberg and Stravinsky were working in a similar time frame in slightly different ways, but leading to things like John Cage, leading to things like other contemporary movements in music. The piece that I recall, I started in music, band geek and all that sort of thing. So the piece that I remember just knocking me off my seat, almost literally, is a piece written about the bombing of Dresden, about the firebombing of Dresden. It's a piece that basically goes through a wind orchestral portion and involves screaming and crying and babies wailing and incredible percussive bass notes, bass trombones, and percussive timpani all over the place. It's a piece I remember seeing, I don't know, it was maybe 20, and it brought me to tears. If you get a chance to see it, it's quite a controversial piece. It's felt to be manipulative and everything else, but it was my first experience with something that really shook me to my core. Last year, I was lucky enough to see an exhibition at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal of an artist that I knew nothing about, Angela Matisse. She's an Australian artist who had done a piece called Citizens Band. And I'm going to describe to you, and if I start crying, I apologize, but this is a piece basically where she has gone out to try and document the experience of exiles, people from all over the world who are in exile and live that way in Australia and France specifically. And it's a set of 4 videos that project in a square. You're in the middle of the square, and it goes through a series of films. This is a young woman from Central Africa who is on her own in the middle of a public pool performing what's called water percussion. It's something that the women of her part of the world would go out into the lakes and rivers and do en masse, and they would play the bodies of water that brought life to their villages. It goes then to a gentleman who is playing his battery-operated Casio, a blind Algerian folk singer who's singing the songs of his hero, a political leader and folk singer in Algeria who was killed for his political beliefs. While you're watching him, he's standing on the subway train almost literally, and people are just passing him by. It's a very isolating, lonely experience. You can see the terrible, the looks that he gets from people. It then goes on to show a gentleman who's in exile from Tibet doing Tibetan throat singing, sitting on a little tiny chair outside of a dep in Paris with nobody around. And then it finishes with a fellow from North Africa who whistles alone in his cab, sitting at the side of the road, sitting there whistling like nothing you've ever seen before. So I saw the last film segment. It then goes into this joined, synced musical piece. And then during that sync piece, I went off and read about this. I hadn't read, didn't know anything. I look at a lot of art, didn't know anything about this artist. I read the text panel, went back and watched the other 3 pieces, and was shaken. I walked away, and as I was walking away and the sound was receding, I fell. I couldn't breathe. My vision was gone. It was truly shock. It was the most overwhelming experience I've ever had with a piece of art, and I still cry when I talk about it. Does that mean it would affect everybody the same way? No. Okay, but for weeks, I couldn't, if I thought about it, I would start crying. For months now, over a year, as I start to tell people about it, I start crying. I'm working at trying to bring this piece to Edmonton because I need to see it again. Okay, this is something called the Stendhal syndrome. Okay, it was described in the early 1800s. Visitors to Florence, seeing David, seeing the collections that the Medicis in Florence had put together, seeing the beauty of these objects of work, were just described as being overwhelmed, short of breath, chest pain. Okay, they were unable to stand, they were unable to speak, they were left overwhelmed by artwork. That's shock. It's a type of shock. It isn't a negative connotation of it, okay, unless you have a lot of chest pain. But it's something, that's the power of what creative things can do to people. Is it new? Are we shocked? Okay, is shock new? No, this was from the 1300s. This is an illuminated manuscript, okay? This kind of thing has been going on for a very long time. I'm not going to go through a bunch of art history because that's not my background, okay? But even if you look at the very earliest examples of work created for art, okay? The Venus of Willendorf is a small piece. It's a small talisman. It's about this big. It's a great big lady with pendulous breasts. It's a sexualized object, and it is something that somebody created for art. Okay, probably for a spiritual purpose. These manuscripts were also often religious in nature, almost all the time. But if you read the marginalia, if you look at the images, they're hilarious and shocking. Okay, they were dealing with things that we're still having difficulty as a society dealing with. This is Goya. Okay, in the early 1800s, Goya did a series of prints about the horrors of the Napoleonic War to the Spanish people. Okay, these are really not easy things to look at. They're beautifully done as prints. They're stunning. Okay, but the imagery is terrible. Mutilation, decapitation, rape, sexual violence. Okay, they're shocking. Okay, if you see them in real life, they will set you back on your heels. But they stand the test of time because they're a document and they're important social objects. This is a famous painting that was only allowed to be shown really in the latter part of the 20th century. This is Courbet's Origin of the World. It was originally done for a Turkish diplomat in the late 1800s. And is a stunning piece of art that you still can't put on Facebook. It's too shocking. This, if you ever get a chance to see it, is overwhelming. This is a drawing by Otto Dix, a German artist from 1922. Dix and the German Expressionists went through the First World War. Most of them were excited to be part of the war. They believed in the cause in the sort of early part of the 19-teens. Okay. At the end of it, they were so decimated as people that it took them years, and Dix himself spent a life basically trying to recover from that war. In the Second World War, Dix and the rest of the Expressionists and numerous other artists in Germany, Austria, and elsewhere were the degenerate artists. Their work was rounded up and destroyed by the Nazis. Okay. It was too controversial. It was too far from what they believed in. Can art still shock us? I don't know the answer to this, okay? I know that I felt it. But in a world where we're bombarded with imagery like 9/11, like the tsunami in Thailand, like recent events, okay, do we have the ability to be shocked by art anymore? We each have to find our own answers about that. I'm not convinced on one side or another. I know that I worry that the power of art is diluted by my ability to go to the internet and hit online beheading and watch an ISIS video. Okay? I can call up on any streaming service all sorts of horror and gore porn. Okay? I can saw 1 through 475, and I can watch all sorts of terrible things happening to people. I can't, because I can't handle that imagery. Lots of people can. I don't judge that. But I question what's going on when we live in a world where a lot of what we're exposed to from a visual art point of view is really pretty saccharine. Okay? There's a lot of abstracted imagery out there. There's a lot of things that are really what I call neck-up art. Okay? There's a lot of creation that goes on where it really almost purposely avoids being visceral or being emotional. And that isn't right or wrong, but my concern sometimes is that with the predominance of that kind of imagery and with the ease of that kind of imagery and with the fact that a lot of cultural practices are being funded by large corporations, especially banks, who don't want anything in their foyer that you might be upset by. Okay? So when they fund a painting competition, when they fund a new artist competition, when they do those sorts of things, that's wonderful, but how does that change what we're exposed to? How does that change our ability to read difficult imagery, to be affected by emotional content? I'll just get you to go back. This is a photograph. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's by a South African photographer that was part of the Bang Bang Club. They were a group who basically exposed, through photojournalism, the horrors of apartheid. They were an important part of the death of apartheid. And this is a piece that, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name, Carter, won the Pulitzer Prize for. Okay? He killed himself 9 months after he won it. He got so much shit for taking this photograph. This is a photograph of a young Sudanese girl who's trying to make her way to a feeding station. And as she's sort of slowing down, the vulture landed. Okay? It's not nearly as close as it seems. Okay? He ensured that the girl did make it to the feeding station after he got the shot. Okay? But he was absolutely crucified by various parts of society because this became an image at the time when images were starting to become viral. It was 1992, 1993, I think. He was affected by lots of different things, but the piles of crap he got for taking this important document of a time, okay, for not helping the girl, for not jumping in, for not feeding her himself, that had to play a part in the psyche that then led him to gas himself 9 months later. Okay? Contemporary artists have been working with the shocking for a long time. This is a performance called Shoot by Chris Burden, done in 1973. Chris Burden was a young artist in California who, in a performative capacity, had his friend shoot him with a .22. He then went on to have himself crucified on the hood of or on the roof, actually, of a Volkswagen Beetle. Okay? Driven out of the garage, driven back in. They're incredibly provocative images. They could be looked at simply as attention-getting tactics, and the cynical in us will probably see it that way. But at that point in time, it wasn't. This was an exploration of the artist's suffering. This is an exploration of endurance in the same way that an Ironman race is an endurance capacity, a marathon, any of these sorts of things. This is a creative pursuit. This is a fairly famous image. This is a piece by Andres Serrano that is absolutely beautiful. If you ever get a chance to see it, I would encourage you to do it. Okay? This is a lovely formal photograph, beautiful amber color. It's an amazing, glowing piece of work. Okay? It is, if you look at the lighting, it's sort of almost a referential lighting on the body of Christ, crucified on the cross. This just about brought down the NEA in the US. This piece and a Mapplethorpe show in 1987 just about destroyed public funding for the arts. Okay, this piece is called Piss Christ. Okay, it has everything to do with the artist's body, the fact that the artist had lost dozens, if not scores of friends to HIV and AIDS, which is something that the American government was completely and utterly ignoring at that point in time. This is what I think is probably one of the most important photographs in Canadian contemporary art history. This is a piece by A.E. Bronson. A.E. Bronson was one of the founding 3 members of a trio called General Public. General Public was a band from my youth. So this gentleman's name was Felix. Felix was part of a 3-part family. General Idea was a family, they were a business, they were an art entity. This was taken shortly after Felix died of HIV in 1994. He was the second of the 3 to die. The first had died about 6 or 8 months earlier than this, and A.E. Bronson remains the only living member of General Idea. This was taken after Felix's body was prepared for his family and chosen family to visit him. This is the last collaborative work of General Idea, who are Canadian art titans. Okay, this is a difficult photograph, obviously. It's also one that is quite controversial, and amongst people that knew General Idea, it was felt to be exploitative. And yet, it's a beautiful family photo. It goes back art historically to how the rise of photography probably wouldn't exist if it weren't for postmortem photos. Okay, because for families in the late 1800s, that's how you memorialized your children, especially. Okay, as you would have your children photographed with their brothers and sisters as a way of recording the fact that a life lived. Okay, this is a record of a life lived. It's shocking, it's potent, it's guttural, and yet it's really, in my belief, important. I showed this photograph in a show called Our Families, a couple of years ago, and it was my goal when I set up the gallery to try specifically to show this work. I had seen it on billboards in LA around the time that it was first shown in 2000. This is by a woman named Rebecca Belmore. Rebecca is a Canadian First Nations artist. She was Canada's representative at the Venice Biennial in 2006, I believe. Rebecca is a phenomenal artist, and like a lot of Aboriginal artists, she has really struggled. This piece is absolutely stunning. It's formally, beautifully composed. It's very difficult subject matter, and it is an expression of a First Nations woman's experience, both in the art world and in the world in general. It's an important document. It's an important art piece, and it's not easy to look at. It can be shocking to some people, and yet I can assure you that when you see this light box that's about 7 feet long, it can shake you. This is another piece, sorry for the quality of the image. This is another family photograph that we had in the family show. This is by a gentleman named Evergon, who's a queer photographer in Montreal. This is his mother, who at 82 said, "How come you never take pictures of me naked?" We had 4 of Evergon's pieces from this series. There's a movie called Margaret and Evergon that's available. I think you can stream it. I would encourage you to watch it. It's about a family's life, not a great life, in the latter part of the 20th century. This photograph, when in its real life, is 8.5 feet high and 5 feet wide. Okay, it is absolutely stunning. It's a unique. There will not be any additional ones. He can't find the paper to print it more than the one time that he did, and I'm working to try and get it into the National Gallery. This is a piece we had in Art Toronto. It's by Tammy Sawzel. She's a Montreal painter that I've worked with for a number of years. This is called The Compromise, and it's a story. She's a visual storyteller, and this came out of her experience doing a painting residency in Dawson City, surrounded by permafrost melting and townships falling into disrepair because of it. And it's a reflection on a CBC documentary about First Nations communities in southern Ontario surrounded by manufacturing and plastics. The birth ratios have changed from being 1-to-1, approximately female to male, to being 3 females to every male. The males are often born small, effeminate, ambiguous genitalia, which is very similar to things that are going on in reptilian and amphibian populations. And this is her saying, okay, what's our story 250 years from now? Okay? Will we have 3 girls going out trying to hunt down the last of the breeding stock to try and perpetuate the race? We had people who yelled at us in the booth for showing it. I've had people, when I showed it here, absolutely, this is terrible, how can you show this? I show it because it's important. I show it because it's beautifully painted and it draws me in. I show it because the story is phenomenal. And I show it because it's an important cultural document of our time. Similar to that, this is an Australian artist named Patricia Piccinini. And Patricia makes sculpture works out of latex using studio prop and movie studio special effects techniques. And she makes objects about the future of all animal species. She makes it about the difficult relationship between us and the natural world. She makes it between the easy to digest and the other. And if you ever get a chance to see them, they are absolutely beautiful. They're upsetting to some people. She basically is creating new species from what she sees the world becoming. But they are so touching and emotionally loaded that I would encourage you to travel as far as you need to see the work, because it really, really is amazing. This is a piece by a young artist in Montreal. And this is one of the prints she showed in her master show. It's called After. And it came out of her spending 6 months in an abattoir, learning all of the jobs of an abattoir, and raising animals for slaughter. She did it because she was interested in where her food came from. She was interested in the experience, and she decided that what she wanted to do was to document from a first-hand point of view the entire life of animals raised for food. It's an important thing, you know. Some of us don't eat meat, some of us do, and it's not a judgmental thing. Her desire was to understand and go through the entire experience. So this was part of a series of photographs that she did showing sort of the animal heads, showing the photographs of the meat that she herself procured by slaughtering the animal and by butchering it. And it's a piece that got her in a lot of trouble. A lot of people are upset by it. They were shocked by it. And yet it's something that we have around us all the time. We can, I am able to separate myself too much, I think, from the things that go on around me. I make choices, and I don't do so necessarily thoughtfully, but it's artwork like this that brings me back and makes me, question what I am, who I am, what I'm doing, what the world around me is. And we are surrounded by lots of images. We're surrounded and inundated by video and all sorts of visual imagery that we become, I think, quite inured to. It's easy to fall into art then is something that's easy, or it's pretty, or it goes with my couch, or it is something that that will simply make my life pleasant. But I would put to you that sometimes art like that simply becomes dressing on the wall or in a space. And those things are fine, but they aren't necessarily art. They might be design, they might be decoration, but I feel that for art to have a lasting impact, it should touch us somewhere other than from the neck up, somewhere deeper than from the eyes to the brain. And so that's why I think that I would love to see more shock in art. I would like to see more imagery that challenges me, whether it's from a creative practice that is, that's a more commercial-centric thing. Some of the most profound things that I've ever seen were Benetton ads from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. Okay, Benetton took HIV and AIDS on as a huge project, and they took on poverty, and they took on social isolation, and they took on all sorts of things. And those imageries, I think, will stand as incredible cultural documents, whether they were created for advertising or not. Okay, I think artwork that sends you away with a thought or a feeling or an anger or a passion or a lust, okay, or sadness. Those are artists, whether they're commercial or truly sort of purely for creative industry. Those are artists who are doing their jobs. Okay, shock may be a negative term. It may not be a negative term. The Angelica Matisse was definitely not negative, but it changed my life. Okay, I would encourage you to seek out and ask and look for things that touch you, even when they hurt, even when they make you sad, even when they make you open your mind. Because I think the things that can happen if we're surrounded by those things, that's where shock happens. That's when we can bring life to an existence that at this point in time, unfortunately, is a social movement that is about artifice and superficiality and the surface of things. And I think that it's work like this that allows us to dive deeper, as uncomfortable as that is sometimes. I hope the imagery that I've shown you hasn't been too upsetting for people. I'm not going to apologize for it being upsetting to some. Okay, but this is the power that art can bring to people's lives. Okay, and please, if you are able to, get to work like this and attach to it, I would, engage with it and sit with it, even when it's uncomfortable. As a collector, I've always found the work that sends me away, that keeps me up at night, the stuff that keeps coming back to me, that's the work that lasts. That's the work that I can go back to 50 times, 100 times for a lifetime and have it connect with me each time I go back to it. On that topic, there is a show that I have not yet seen at the Art Gallery of Alberta that has just gone up of expressionist art through the ages. It includes work by Otto Dix. It includes some of these types of artworks. It's curated out of McMaster University, out of their own collection, and it has some absolutely stunning pieces. I would encourage you all to go to the AGA to see it, please, because it's amazing. And one piece in particular is a piece by Gershon Iskovitz, who is he's a titan of Canadian modernist art. He did beautiful, color-based explorations of space and light. But the piece that they've got is a piece that he did in the concentration camp. It's unsigned because his life would have been at risk if it had been found. Okay, it's a piece on paper, laid on cardboard, of people in the camp. Okay, and it is an example of powerful social document as art.